So just like in Season 1, the penultimate episode of Season 2 once again proves that when a story approaches its climax, everything begins to tighten. Every storyline begins to collide, and the tension rises to a level where every single moment feels important. And Paradise Season 2 Episode 7 delivered exactly that. An intense, emotionally layered, and narratively powerful episode that easily stands out as the strongest of the season so far. Because what makes this episode so compelling is not just the action or the chaos unfolding on the surface, but the deeper psychological and thematic elements that are constantly at play beneath it. And as we go through this breakdown, we are going to explore every major storyline, from Sinatra's transformation and the collapse of her empire to the shocking revelations surrounding Link and Dylan, the mystery of Alex, the tension between Xavier and Terry, the meltdown of the bunker, and what all of this could potentially mean for the finale. But before we dive into all of that, just a quick warning, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, this is your chance to pause and come back later, because from here on out, we are going deep into everything that happened. And starting with Sinatra, because her arc in this episode is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating and symbolic parts of the story, as we see a version of her at the beginning that feels completely different from the one we've known before. A version that appears almost stripped down emotionally, reflected perfectly in the muted gray outfit that she wears, which in itself feels like a visual representation of her internal state. A woman who has lost something so significant that it has drained the color out of her world. And that something, of course, is her son, Dylan. And what makes this even more interesting is how the episode slowly builds toward her transformation. Because by the end, when she puts on that striking red suit, it is not just a wardrobe change, it is a statement. It symbolizes power, control, and a return to the version of herself that is willing to do whatever it takes. And the smile that accompanies that moment speaks volumes, because it is not just relief, it is belief. Belief that what she has been working toward may have actually worked. And this ties directly into the central mystery of Alex, which becomes even more intriguing in this episode. Because for the longest time, the question has been, who is Alex? But this episode subtly shifts that question into something much more profound. What is Alex? And that distinction completely changes how we interpret everything, especially when you consider the possibility that Alex is not a person at all, but rather a form of advanced artificial intelligence or a supercomputer capable of interacting with time itself. And when you look back at Sinatra's line, where she says, "It worked, I think it worked," it suddenly takes on a completely new meaning, because it suggests that she may have successfully altered something in the past, possibly sending information back in time in order to change the outcome of Dylan's fate. And if that is the case, then it opens the door to the idea of alternate timelines, where in one version Dylan dies, but in another he survives. And somehow, that version of him finds his way into the present timeline, which is where Link comes in. And the reveal that Link is actually Dylan is one of the most mind-bending twists in the series so far, because it forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about his character, his origins, and his purpose. And when you start connecting the dots, the clues were actually there all along. From the fact that Dylan would have been 26 years old if he had lived, to the confirmation that Link is also 26, to the moment where he is directly referred to as Dylan. All of it builds toward this revelation in a way that feels both surprising and inevitable at the same time. And what makes it even more complex is the implication that he may not even fully understand who he is or where he comes from, which raises questions about his memory, his identity, and whether he is aware of his connection to Sinatra. And this creates a fascinating dynamic between the two characters, because while Sinatra believes she has found her son again, Link may not even realize that he is the person she thinks he is. And this disconnect could become a major source of conflict moving forward, especially as their goals begin to align and clash at the same time. Because on one hand, both of them seem to be driven by a desire to change the future, to prevent the collapse of the world, and to rewrite the events that led to the current state of devastation. But on the other hand, their methods and motivations may not be entirely the same. And this is where the concept of time manipulation becomes incredibly important, because if Alex truly has the ability to send information across time, then every action taken in the present could have consequences that ripple across multiple timelines, creating fractures, overlaps, and paradoxes.
and this could explain some of the more unusual moments in the episode, such as the recurring nosebleeds experienced by multiple characters, which may not just be random occurrences, but rather physical manifestations of temporal interference, moments where the timeline is being altered or strained. And
If this is the case, then it suggests that the world of paradise is on the brink of something much larger than just a physical collapse. It is on the verge of a temporal collapse as well, where the boundaries between different timelines begin to blur. And this idea is further reinforced by the visual and thematic parallels throughout the episode, particularly in the way the bunker is portrayed, because while it was originally designed as a place of safety and survival, it has now become something entirely different, a prison, a failing system that is collapsing under its own weight, both literally and metaphorically. And this brings us to one of the most powerful themes of the episode, the idea that nothing lasts forever, that every empire, no matter how strong it appears, will eventually fall. And this is something that is explicitly stated through Cal's speech, which draws parallels between historical empires, sports dynasties, and the bunker itself, creating a sense of inevitability that hangs over the entire narrative. And as we see Sinatra's empire begin to crumble from within, with dissent growing among her people and her focus shifting toward her own personal goals, it becomes clear that her downfall is not just a possibility, it is a certainty, and the only question is how and when it will happen. And this internal collapse is mirrored by the external threat posed by Link and his militia, who are preparing to launch an attack. If this is the case, then it suggests that the world of paradise is on the brink of something much larger than just a physical collapse. It is on the verge of a temporal collapse as well, where the boundaries between different timelines begin to blur. And this idea is further reinforced by the visual and thematic parallels throughout the episode, particularly in the way the bunker is portrayed, because while it was originally designed as a place of safety and survival, it has now become something entirely different, a prison, a failing system that is collapsing under its own weight, both literally and metaphorically. And this brings us to one of the most powerful themes of the episode, the idea that nothing lasts forever, that every empire, no matter how strong it appears, will eventually fall. And this is something that is explicitly stated through Cal's speech, which draws parallels between historical empires, sports dynasties, and the bunker itself, creating a sense of inevitability that hangs over the entire narrative. And as we see Sinatra's empire begin to crumble from within, with dissent growing among her people and her focus shifting toward her own personal goals, it becomes clear that her downfall is not just a possibility, it is a certainty, and the only question is how and when it will happen. And this internal collapse is mirrored by the external threat posed by Link and his militia, who are preparing to launch an attack. And the bunker, creating a situation where the structure is being pushed to its limits from both inside and outside. And this dual pressure is what ultimately drives the story forward, setting the stage for what promises to be an explosive and high-stakes finale, where everything that has been building throughout the season will finally come to a head. And as all of these threads begin to tighten, the episode shifts its focus toward another deeply emotional and tension-filled storyline, which is the reunion between Xavier and Terry. And what makes this particular arc so compelling is not just the fact that these two characters are finally back together, but the way in which their reunion is handled. Because instead of going for something overly dramatic or exaggerated, the show chooses to present it in a much more intimate and grounded way, allowing the small moments to carry the emotional weight. Whether it is the simple embrace they share or the subtle line about liking her hair, it all serves to highlight the genuine connection between them and the time that has been lost. And this is where Gary's role in the story becomes incredibly important, because he acts as both a catalyst and a source of tension, as he orchestrates the situation in a way that forces Xavier and Terry into a confrontation that feels unavoidable. And for a moment, it genuinely feels like this situation could turn tragic, especially when you consider Gary's mindset and the way he talks about drowning, using the metaphor of how a drowning person can pull you under with them, which initially comes across as a warning, but also
foreshadows the possibility of him doing something drastic. However, what makes this moment so powerful is that it ultimately subverts those expectations, because instead of leading to violence, it leads to an act of compassion, as Terry chooses to save Gary rather than let him fall. And this decision not only changes the outcome of the situation, but also reinforces one of the key themes of the episode, which is the idea that people are capable of making choices that defy expectation even in the most desperate circumstances. And Gary's emotional breakdown, particularly the moment where he expresses how the worst years in history were the best years of his life because they gave him purpose and belonging, adds another layer of complexity to his character. Because while his actions may not be justifiable, his feelings are understandable. And this creates a sense of emotional conflict for the audience, as we are forced to reconcile our judgment of his behavior with our understanding of his pain. And this is something that the show handles exceptionally well, allowing us to feel empathy without necessarily excusing the actions. And as this storyline reaches its conclusion, there is a lingering sense of uncertainty, particularly regarding the timeline of events, because there are hints that what we are seeing may not be happening simultaneously with the events involving Sinatra and Link, which raises
questions about how these different threads will eventually converge, especially as we move into the finale. And speaking of convergence, we then move into the storyline involving Jeremy and Robinson, which, while perhaps not as emotionally engaging as some of the other arcs, still plays a crucial role in the overall narrative, particularly in terms of the bunker's impending collapse, because their plan to trigger the failsafe by destroying the oxygen tank is one that in theory should have worked, allowing the doors to open and giving people the choice to leave. But what ultimately causes everything to spiral out of control is the decision by those in power to initiate a lockdown, which goes directly against the system's design, creating a conflict between protocol and authority that results in a complete meltdown. And this moment is significant not just because of its immediate consequences, but because of what it represents, the idea that systems built on control and fear are inherently unstable, and that when those systems are pushed beyond their limits, they inevitably break. And this ties back into the larger theme of collapsing empires, as we see yet another example of how attempts to maintain control can ultimately lead to destruction. And while the conflict between Jeremy and Robinson may feel somewhat forced at times, it still serves to highlight the fractures within the group and the lack of unity that is contributing to the bunker's downfall. And as the oxygen begins to run out and the doors remain closed, the sense of urgency continues to build, creating a situation where the people inside may soon be forced to rely on external intervention, potentially from Link and his militia, which brings us full circle to the idea of internal and external pressures colliding. And alongside all of this, we also have the storyline involving Jane, whose death comes as a surprising yet fitting conclusion to her arc, because while she has been portrayed as a highly skilled and dangerous individual, her downfall ultimately comes not from a physical confrontation, but from being outmaneuvered mentally, as Gabby is able to anticipate and counter her actions, demonstrating that intelligence and strategy can be just as powerful as physical ability. And this moment also reinforces the idea that Jane was not entirely in control of her own actions, as her reliance on a controller to execute her targets suggests that she was more of a tool than an independent agent. And her decision to go after Gabby without direct orders ultimately leads to her demise, serving as a reminder that acting outside of one's role within a system can have fatal consequences. And as we approach the final moments of the episode, everything begins to circle back to Sinatra and her encounter with Alex, which is arguably the most important moment of the entire episode, because it is here that all of the theories, all of the hints, and all of the buildup begin to converge. And when Sinatra finally says, "Hi, Alex," the way she delivers that line is incredibly telling, because it does not feel like she is addressing a person. It feels like she is speaking to something else, something beyond human. And this reinforces the idea that Alex is indeed some form of artificial intelligence, a system capable of interacting with time and altering reality in ways that we are only just beginning to understand. And this moment not only confirms that Sinatra believes her plan has worked, but also sets the stage for what is to come in the finale. Because if Alex truly has the power to change the past, then the implications for the future are enormous. And this brings us to the final takeaway from the episode, which is that everything we have seen so far has been leading to this point, a moment where the boundaries between
Past, present, and future begin to blur, where characters are forced to confront the consequences of their actions, and where the fate of the world may hinge on a single decision. And in my opinion, this is what makes this episode so effective, because it manages to balance multiple storylines, complex themes, and emotional moments in a way that feels cohesive and engaging, creating a sense of anticipation that leaves you eager to see how everything will be resolved. And if this episode is anything to go by, the finale has the potential to not only deliver a satisfying conclusion, but also to redefine the entire story in ways that we may not yet fully understand, making Paradise one of the most compelling and thought-provoking series currently out there. And with everything now in motion, all that is left to do is wait and see how it all unfolds.